The Paddington franchise is famous in the movie community for specifically Paddington 2 being the highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. It has a 99%, which means that it's essentially deemed perfect by both professional movie critics and general audiences. Now that's Paddington 2, but the original Paddington movie has a 96%, and the new one that just came out a few days ago has a 94%. Now listen, no offense to anybody who rates movies on Rotten Tomatoes, but everybody knows I'm the arbiter of taste. I decide what's good and what's not. So if I like it, that means it's a good movie. And if I don't like it, that means it's a bad movie. So obviously I have to watch these movies so I can determine whether or not they're actually good movies. I already did, and I feel like it's kind of a giveaway given the fact that I am dressed like Paddington and I've got little bear earrings on that I was a fan. I may or may not have ordered a little Paddington for our set back here. You might see a little Paddington pop up. Can you believe I found this at a thrift store this morning? Let me show you. I don't know if you can tell, but it has like the little knots. Like they're not the right color, but it like basically is a Paddington jacket shape, but it's like a dress. The universe wanted me to dress like Paddington for this video, I swear. I did find a red hat, but it looks ridiculous on me. Hang on. They had this hat. It's more of like a baseball hat, but I got it anyway, but I didn't actually try it on at the store because I wanted to disinfect it before I put it on my head. And when I put it on, it's not shaped like a normal baseball hat, and it looked ridiculous on me. So we're not wearing it. It's a little bit giving if Paddington played Umbridge in the Harry Potter movies. Like the shoulder pads are a lot. I don't usually wear shoulder pads like this, but that's okay. So I watched all 3 movies this week and I did fall madly in love with Paddington. He's such a sweet little bear, and I'm gonna tell you why promptly. Spoilers for the movies. Paddington is a children's book series that features a little bear named Paddington who lives with a family called the Browns. Mr. Brown is the dad, and he is an insurance adjuster. Specifically, he's like a risk assessor, and so he knows how risky everything is, and so he's very like risk averse. Mrs. Brown is a children's book illustrator. She's a lot more whimsical than Mr. Brown. She's a lot less risk averse than he is. They're a good match. They balance each other out, we'll just say. Then there are the children, Judy and Jonathan. We're never given their exact ages, but it's implied that Jonathan is in elementary school and Judy is in middle school, or the British equivalents of those things. I don't know what they call the levels. The family lives in London, and the children's books show Paddington on all these adventures, getting into all kinds of antics. He doesn't really think before he acts. He causes all kinds of chaos. Now, I will admit to you, my family was not really a Paddington family. We were more a Very Hungry Caterpillar, the Little Red Hen, Stinky Cheese Man kind of family. So I don't really have like a childhood attachment to Paddington, but I'm very attached to him now as an adult, actually. I love him. This first movie acts as a little bit of an origin story. It was hard for me to find out if this lore is ever actually established in the children's books. These are like picture books, so I assume that this lore isn't really like a thing, and that it's just understood that the Paddington is a bear that lives with the Browns and they live in London and he goes on these adventures. But I don't know that they ever like explain where Paddington came from in the actual children's book. Am I framed low? I feel like I always do this. So this first movie is a little bit of an origin story. How did Paddington end up with the Browns? How did he end up in London? Where did he come from? All of that sort of thing. The movie opens on an older nature documentary where we see an explorer visiting Peru, where he meets 2 bears that he names Lucy and Pastuzo. He really bonds with these bears and is able to teach them English. They hang out together, and the documentary montage is just sort of about how incredible these bears are, and they were able to learn English and all of that. And then at the end of it, he invites them to London, and then he takes off. We are then shown that some time passes, and now Lucy and Pastuzo are living with a bear that they call their nephew Paddington. We find out in the later movies that he's not really their nephew, they just discovered him as a cub, but that's not established in this movie. So for now, we just know he calls them Aunt Lucy and Uncle Pastuzo, and he lives with them in the jungle in Peru. We see them make marmalade together, which is like an orange jelly. Oh, I meant to get some to try for this video. Oh well, sorry, I was gonna do a marmalade review because I've never actually tried it, but I completely forgot to get that from the store. So anyway, we watch them make marmalade together and just kind of hang out in the jungle. And then of course, because it's a children's movie, it has to open with just horrific heartbreak. There's a big earthquake, it collapses their home and destroys where they live and kills Uncle Pastuzo. So now it's just Paddington and Aunt Lucy. Aunt Lucy is a very old bear at this point, and so she tells Paddington Paddington, you know what? I am going to go to the home for retired bears, but you're such a young bear. You don't belong at the home for retired bears. You should be having all these adventures. There was this adventurer that we met a while back. He lives in London. You should travel to London, find the adventurer, find the home in London. And Paddington's like, you know what, Aunt Lucy, I will. And he stows away on a ship and sneaks off to London. And when he arrives there, he's just chilling at Paddington Station, just asking people if they have a home that he can live in. It's very cute. And eventually this family starts to walk past him. He catches Mrs. Brown's attention and she goes up to him and she sees that he's a little bear with a little suitcase and a little red hat that used to be his Uncle Pastuzo's, and he has a tag around his neck that says, please be nice to this bear, I'm pretty sure. And Mr. Brown is like, oh my god, he's probably selling something, like leave him alone. And she's like, no, he needs a home. And so they end up taking him in for the night with the promise that they're going to help him find a more permanent home. But to them, that means taking him to the authorities so that they can either get him adopted or put him into an orphanage. However, Paddington captures the hearts of Mrs. Brown, Judy, and Jonathan. So all three of them want to help Paddington actually find the explorer that he's looking for, because the explorer told them that they would always be welcome with him in London. But Mr. Brown really wants to take him to the authorities. Antics ensue. This part of the movie is very much, I think, supposed to feel like the children's books. Paddington is trying to get ready and accidentally floods the bathroom. He starts his search for the explorer, and every step of the way, he's making poor decisions, causing antics, destroying property, you know, the usual. Mr. Brown is still hesitant, especially due to all the property damage that Paddington is causing, and is adamant that they should take him to the authorities, is what they keep saying. Now, Mrs. Brown convinces him to instead allow Paddington to stay with them until they can find the explorer that he is looking for. However, he catches the eye of a rare animal collector. She's an animal collector and taxidermist. Like, she likes to get rare animals and then stuff them and keep them in her collection. Gross, we hate her and people like her. More antics ensue as the exotic animal collector is hunting Paddington, seemingly for her collection at first, while Paddington is trying to search out the explorer that met his aunt and uncle in Peru all those years ago. And eventually, Paddington is left home alone at the Browns. The exotic animal collector breaks into the house and is trying to kidnap him. He manages to escape her clutches, but a fire is set or something like that. The house does not burn down or anything, but it does cause damage within the house. And Mr. Brown is really adamant with Mrs. Brown that Paddington needs to go to the authorities, that he's not good to like stay in the house. And Paddington overhears them having this conversation through the plumbing system. So he gets really sad. So he decides to leave the Browns alone, and he leaves out on his own to try and finish finding the explorer. He has a list of names and he hunts down the houses, and eventually he finds the correct one. And this is where we find out that the exotic animal collector that has been hunting him down is actually the daughter of the explorer that met his aunt and uncle all those years ago. And that when he returned to London, he told everybody what he had found, and that they did not believe him because he didn't bring back a specimen. He then refused to bring back a specimen because that would mean killing one of the bears. This is the only place in this movie where the world building falls through a little bit. Bears do exist in this universe, I assume at least. So it's not that this man discovered bears, unless they didn't know about bears until this guy went to Peru, but that's not what it seems like. What's incredible about Lucy and Pastuzo is that they were able to learn English. He was able to teach them English. Again, it's never explained why, it's just explained that he's able to like bond to these bears, and then he teaches them English. Presumably, the incredible thing about these bears is the fact that they're able to speak English, so I don't understand how killing one of them and stuffing them, like taxidermizing them, is going to like prove that he found bears that can talk. Like, he had video of them. We watched the video of it. So I do not understand why the video was not enough proof that he actually found these bears. But the whole guild is basically saying, if you don't bring back a specimen, we're not going to count it as a real discovery. And because he refused to go back, kill one of the two bears and stuff them, he was completely ousted from the Explorers Guild and he was not credited with the discovery, and he lived the rest of his life in shame. And his daughter always thought it was ridiculous that he did not want to go stuff one of the bears. They could have been rich and famous explorers, but instead he threw his whole entire life away just to protect these silly bears. So when she finds out that Paddington is the same kind of bear as his aunt and uncle, and that he is also able to talk human language, that is why she wants to kill him and stuff him, so that she can redeem her father's name and become herself rich and famous off of this discovery, although I don't know why she would. I don't think you get rich for discovering things. You get a lot of credit in the scientific community, but I don't really think they make you rich. Scientists, comment. Do you get rich for discovering things? I guess I don't know. Anyway, he's captured by the explorer's daughter, and the family shows up to help him, and they end up defeating her together, and then they decide to take Paddington in as their ward, essentially, and let Paddington live with the Browns in London, instead of turning him into the authorities to find a different home. I think I also forgot to mention that he only had a bear name, and they named him Paddington because they found him at Paddington Station. Adorable. And also, right when the family finds him, he's sitting under a lost and found sign that's turned off, and when the mom starts talking to him, the found like lights up, and that's like a really cute touch. This movie gets a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was adorable. I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I will be honest with you guys, I think sometimes children's movie reviews can be confusing for adults, like to actually tell if it's I don't want to say if it's a good movie or not, because ultimately if it's a good movie for children and it's a children's movie, then it did what it was trying to do and it's a good movie. But I do think that there are a lot of children's movies out there that are like well made for children and are entertaining enough for adults that adults end up giving them good reviews because their kids really like it and they didn't mind watching it or they enjoyed it. And I guess what I'm getting at is like, I think sometimes children's movie reviews can be difficult to parse through if you're an adult without children as to whether or not it's a movie that you would enjoy, because I think there is a difference between my kids really enjoyed this movie and I enjoyed watching it too with them, and it was a fun bonding experience and I thought it was entertaining for me too, as opposed to it being like, this movie is so good that if you are an adult watching it without children with you watching it, that it still like makes it worth it for you to watch this movie instead of a movie made for adults. Like, I think those are different things, and so I'm not trying to like put down children's media or say that it's like less good than adult media. In fact, I get really annoyed when people imply that. Like, media made for children is not inherently worse because it's made for children, but it is objectively made for children. And sometimes that means that adults aren't going to enjoy it as much as they might enjoy media that is made for adults. That's all I'm saying. And so going into this movie, I did not know how I was going to feel about it and whether or not I was going to feel like it was actually a really, really good movie or if I thought it was going to be like a good children's movie. And in my opinion, this is a phenomenal movie. Like, it's actually incredible. I was like shocked by how much I enjoyed this movie. I was hooked the whole time. I was entertained the whole time. Paddington is really cute. He's so sweet and he's such a like cute little character and he's so goofy. The guy who plays Mr. Brown honestly makes this movie so good as well. I feel like it wouldn't be as good if he wasn't as good in the role as he is. Nicole Kidman plays the villain too, and she does such a good job. Obviously, she's like an incredible actress. The characters were very over the top, but they were over the top in a way that was like fun and goofy and like made it enjoyable. But really where I feel this movie shines, and the reason why I feel it's so good, is because it's very whimsical. Like, I think children's media can sometimes be very like spoon-feedy, overfeeding the message to the audience. I've talked about this before, especially with young adult novels, but I think a lot of times adults that create media for children really dumb down their message because they're like, oh, I'm making this for children, and children don't have like the capacity to understand metaphor the way adults do. And I just think that's super belittling. I don't think we should like underestimate children. They're significantly smarter than a lot of adults think they are at every age, and they pick up on a lot more than people like think. It's basically their job to learn. You spend your entire childhood learning everything you can at every turn, so they notice a lot, they learn a lot, and they pick up on things quickly. And the best children's media that embraces that and understands that. So this movie did not like really dumb down anything that it was saying or doing. I don't really feel like it was over the top with the message, which there is kind of this overarching metaphor of Paddington as like an immigrant. There is commentary in there about people being welcoming of immigrants, and especially like children from other countries. And so I do think this is a really beautiful movie, especially to show a child that has moved countries. I think they would get a lot out of it, but I don't feel like that was spoon-fed. Like, I think it was obvious, but it was obvious in a way that wasn't like overly explained or annoying. And the movie itself was just whimsical. There's a lot of magical realism. Like, it's just kind of accepted that Paddington can talk. And while it's established that it was the explorer that taught these bears how to speak, it's never really established why the bears can speak. Could all bears speak if taught? Is it just that we have not taught all these other bears language? Or is there something specific and special about these bears, which is why they can speak and other bears can't? Could they learn other languages? None of these questions are ever even asked by any of the characters, let alone answered. It's a little bit strange to people that Paddington can talk, but once they get over that strangeness, it's not like overly reacted to. People don't freak out seeing him or anything. And a lot of the times he ends up randomly interacting with side characters that just accept he's a talking bear with like no questions asked. And it just makes the movie like super fun. His antics are super funny and like goofy, and a lot of the humor is actually very elevated. Some of it can be very slapstick, but some of it's very clever as well. A lot of the jokes had me like genuinely laughing out loud. Like, it's very funny. And I just like all in all thought it was an adorable movie, and it made me like want to like make people watch it, because I was like, I feel like I kept hearing everybody say Paddington is great, and I was like, yeah, okay, all right, it's a kids movie. Like, I'm sure it's good for a kids movie. I'm sure it's endearing. I'm sure that's why people like it. And now here I am, giant Paddington fan. It's also just like very colorful, and I feel like it actually perfectly captures what is beautiful about childhood and children in general. Children just bring a lot of joy and life into every room that they're in, and a sense of like silliness and whimsy that we just like lose when we get to adulthood. And there are so many stories about adults like rediscovering that whimsy, and there is kind of part of that with the Browns getting used to Paddington living in their home. But whoever made this movie, I think, genuinely loves children and understands them and understands what is like beautiful about a child's perspective on the world. And it really feels like the movie is from the perspective of a child, and it's very whimsical and it's very fun. And there is like a moment, and even with like the discovering that Paddington can talk, like there is kind of a moment where they're like, oh, you're a bear and you can talk, and then that's just accepted. And that's kind of how kids are, right? I already kind of mentioned how like children's whole entire job is to learn. They exist to learn, and that's just what they're like doing at all point in time. And so they like need to be taught things by the adults around them, but they'll just accept what you tell them. And it can be very fun to lie to kids. It can be kind of fun to just like tell them things and let them believe them for a while. And so I feel like that's just a great example of what I mean by it kind of felt like this movie was from a child's perspective and showed almost like a child's view of the world, because it is so whimsical and because it is so fun and because there are these like questions that the movie has, but then they just kind of like accept these things in stride and accept them as part of the universe. And then Paddington is just like accepted as a talking bear, and then he's just like allowed to exist in London as a talking bear, and nobody has any further questions about it. I just think it was really well done. It was really cute. It was really funny, and I really enjoyed it. However, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Paddington 1 has a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. Paddington 2 has a 99%. It's the highest rated movie on the platform. This is interesting for multiple reasons, because sequels are almost never seen as good as the first, and the first movie was like an origin story, so what are they even gonna do with the second movie? And why is it so good? And why is it considered better than the first? Well, Paddington 2 opens with Paddington writing his Aunt Lucy a letter. She is living at the home for retired bears back in Peru, and he is writing her to tell her about his life in London. He's catching her up on where the family is at. His observations of the family are adorable. He very much studies them, right? And he can describe what they're going through in ways that are like really cute and endearing and relatable. Like, you know, you see your family in this family and their antics a lot of the time. And we find out that Aunt Lucy's birthday is coming up and that Paddington wants to get her the perfect gift because she's done so much for him in his life and when he was a cub and all of that and taking him in and raising him. And in this movie, we find out that Aunt Lucy and Uncle Pastuzo aren't actually related to Paddington. They just kind of found him. They saved his life. He was about to like go over a waterfall and they managed to grab him just in time, but they had no idea where he came from. He was just a cub. He didn't know where he was from. The only thing he knew was that his parents were dead. And at the time that they took him in, they were planning a trip to London to visit the explorer that had visited them, but they did not end up being able to go to London because they started raising Paddington instead. So Paddington is like, I gotta get Aunt Lucy the perfect gift because she's done so much for me and she was the one who sent me to London and I've really found a home here. The owner of the antique shop shows him a pop-up book of London and Paddington is like, oh my gosh, I would absolutely love to give that to Aunt Lucy because she was never able to see London for herself. And so I want to get her this book so that she can see like the pop-ups of it and like basically get the experience of seeing London because she was never able to visit. But then he finds out that the book is actually quite expensive because it's one of a kind. So he's like, well, I'll get a job. He gets a job at a barber shop. Antics ensue, obviously, because it's Paddington. He gets into antics. Shenanigans are gonna go down, you know what I'm saying? So he gets fired from that job and then he goes to the local fair with the Browns and he meets an actor played by Hugh Grant who's opening the fair. He's kind of washed up. He doesn't really like act anymore. And he's like making all of his money doing dog food commercials. And Paddington tells him about the pop-up book. And this clearly means something to the actor, but Paddington doesn't pick up on that. And then he gets the idea to become a window washer. And then we see a montage of Paddington washing windows and saving up money. And he's saving up all this money so that he can buy this pop-up book for his aunt so that he can send it to her as a birthday gift. And then just before he's going to be able to buy the book, he's like finally saved up enough money. Somebody breaks into the antique shop and steals it. Paddington sees this go down, so he starts chasing the thief, but a police officer sees Paddington running away from the antique shop and gets confused, thinking Paddington is the one that robbed the place. And then when Paddington gets the thief cornered, they're able to kind of throw a smoke bomb and disappear. And so when Paddington gets cornered by the police, there's like no other thief there. And so they still think he's the one who robbed the antique shop. Then he goes to court where he finds out that the guy that he kind of messed up his hair at the barber shop is the judge. He doesn't really get a fair trial, and then he's sentenced to 10 years in prison for grand larceny for allegedly stealing a pop-up book from an antique shop. That's right, in the highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes, they send the bear to prison. Remember when I said that Paddington is an immigrant metaphor? There are many, many points in the early parts of this movie where we can see how they're drawing this parallel between Paddington and his experiences and immigrants, and specifically refugees, and how there are a lot of people who accept Paddington and love him, but there are a lot of people who don't really accept Paddington just because of who he is and where he comes from. And he gets arrested, doesn't really have a fair trial, and like goes to prison for a ridiculous sentence for what is ultimately a very small crime that they don't have a ton of evidence that he did. And so there is like this very deep metaphor here for the experiences that immigrants can have. It is also like they send a teddy bear to prison, so it is like kind of goofy in that way. But yes, so Paddington goes to jail. He's in prison, and at first he's not having the best experiences there, but he's like so sweet and so cute, and he eventually wins everybody over by making them marmalade. It completely overhauls the prison's like kitchen, and it ends up like a tea shop. I don't want to think it's cute because it's like such a like deep and important like metaphor for immigrants and the unfair treatment that they receive in criminal justice systems, but like he's so cute in his little jumpsuit, and he wins them all over by like making them marmalade. So it is like adorable and endearing, and also like deep and very metaphorical and important. So anyway, Paddington's in jail. Sorry, I feel ridiculous every time I say it. So Paddington's in prison. The family then is trying to clear Paddington's name. So they are trying to find the thief that Paddington saw. They're pasting his picture everywhere based off of a drawing of who Paddington described, but they cannot find anybody who's seen this thief. Now, we, the viewer, know that the thief is Hugh Grant, the actor that he met at the fair. I'm saying this like unironically, like with my whole chest. I like mean this when I say this. Hugh Grant is incredible in this film. Hugh Grant whipped out the performance of a lifetime for Paddington 2. His performance is insane. So he plays this actor that is like kind of unhinged, and basically what you end up finding out, you don't find this out until a little bit later, but whatever, I'm just going to tell you now, is that the pop-up book contains clues to find the treasure of the woman who started the fair. So Hugh Grant is looking for clues within the book to find the treasure, but because he's an actor, he like essentially becomes all these different characters to find the clues that are at all these different landmarks in London. And there are scenes where he's like talking to himself. He has all these like mannequins of his old costumes in this like attic in his house, and he'll be sitting there talking to himself, and he'll just switch between all these characters, and some of them are famous characters like Macbeth and Hamlet and all of that, but he switches accents, he switches like his body, the way that he's speaking, and it's like that on a dime, and it's like he's having a conversation with himself, and he's like looking around to all these different mannequins, and it's like he's having the conversation like as all the different characters on these different mannequins, switching accents, switching like
Thank Larry, Johnny, and all the ghosts of the avenue.
Yeah, but it was close, wasn't it? Hey, too close if you ask me.
Oh, hold your nerve, Macbeth. Screw your courage to the sticking place. We are so nearly there.
I mean, it like actually was like amazing to watch. Hugh Grant is an incredible actor. And you probably already knew that from his performance in a different movie, but like, I'm not joking when I tell you there were points in this movie where I was just like blown away by what Hugh Grant was doing on screen. I'm starting to wonder if like playing the villain in a children's movie is like a dream role for a lot of famous actors, because I do feel like they kind of give stellar performances when given these opportunities. Like Nicole Kidman did the same thing. Her character didn't like lend itself to like show off as much as Hugh Grant's did, but she was also amazing, and the villain in the third movie is hilarious too. I digress. My point is, unironically, one of the best performances I've ever seen of an actor. It was really impressive. So for a lot of the movie, we're just seeing Paddington kind of win over the other prisoners. We're seeing the family try to clear his name, and then we're seeing Hugh Grant try to get all these clues from the pop-up book. Paddington's buddies within the prison are trying to convince him to break out of the prison with them, and they tell him that his family will eventually forget him, but he's convinced the Browns won't forget him. They're only allowed to visit once a month, and visiting day is the next day, and he's like, they're never gonna forget me, don't worry about it. The Browns finally get a lead in the case, and Mrs. Brown specifically is suspicious that Hugh Grant's character is the one who actually stole the book, and so the family pulls off this whole extravagant plan to like break into his house and figure out if he has the pop-up book or not. So they end up feeling like they've found enough proof that Hugh Grant is the culprit, but they don't have any actual like definitive proof at this point in time. They're determined that they're gonna find it, but then they look at the time and they realize that they've completely missed visiting day and they did not go visit Paddington in the prison. Paddington is obviously heartbroken by this. It's really sad. I need them to stop making me cry over this bear. He's heartbroken by the fact that the Browns don't visit him, and then he agrees to the plan to break out of prison. The plan is adorable, it's really cute, it's full of fun antics. It also is the first time, I don't know if they did this in the first movie, they might have and I just missed it, but there's a really fun like moment where we can see the prison from the outside, almost like it's a dollhouse. I think that's such a cute touch for these movies, because it is ultimately based off of a children's book and toy franchise. And so a children's toy, like a dollhouse, being something that they play with in the movie, and like showing some of these buildings that Paddington is in as like a dollhouse from the outside, I think it's like a really cute touch. I think it's adorable. So they have a really cute prison escape that ends up in them leaving the prison in a hot air balloon. I don't know what to tell you guys. It's like really sweet and endearing and whimsical, and it builds off of a lot of the things that I liked about the first movie. It very much feels like it's just silly and like magical and fun, and like goofy things happen and things work out for people and they break out of prison in a hot air balloon. I mean, it's just fun. But then after they break out of prison, the prisoners had promised him that they would help him clear his name if he helped them with the plan to break out of prison. But then once they get outside of prison, they tell Paddington their plan is actually to leave the country, and they try to convince him to go with them. But he's insistent. He wants to stay in London and he wants to clear his name, so he runs off and the other three prisoners leave. Then he calls the Browns from a phone booth and leaves a voicemail on their answering machine. Once again, I would like to request that these movies stop making me cry over this tiny CGI bear. I love him, and I was heartbroken for him, calling home and basically being like, I just wanted to call to say goodbye. They haven't forgotten about you. They just missed visiting day. Like, don't worry. And so then they call back the telephone booth as he's walking away, and they're like, Paddington, oh my God. And he's like, oh my God, I thought you guys forgot about me. And they were like, no, we love you. We've been trying to clear your name. But they find out that the fair is leaving town, or carnival. It's probably more accurately called a carnival, but whatever. They find out it's leaving town, and so they go to the train station because they figure that's where Hugh Grant is going to be, and they find him there, and they all get on various trains. There's like 2 different trains, and they're on these steam trains kind of out on the countryside having like a whole train-based standoff, and eventually they end up snapping a picture of Hugh Grant holding the pop-up book, and Paddington's name is cleared. At the end of the whole train chase thing, Paddington is in a train car that gets thrown into a river, and the door is padlocked shut, and he's trying to get out, and Mrs. Brown is trying to get him out, and they kind of have a moment where they make eye contact, and he's like, it's okay, we're not going to be able to get the door open. This is a children's movie. Every once in a while I have moments in children's movies, and I'm like, why are we drowning the bear? I don't know that we needed that. How do children react to these things? I feel like as a child, I mean, as an adult, I was incredibly distraught, so I can't imagine how I would feel as a child. Anyway, his buddies, the prisoners who escaped with him, end up showing up to help break him out of the train car, so he does not drown. And yay, the day is saved, Paddington's name is clear, Hugh Grant goes to prison, and he's able to live happily ever with the Browns. However, he wasn't able to send the pop-up book to his aunt in time, and he wakes up on her birthday realizing that he never sent her a present. He's very upset about this. He doesn't want her to feel like he doesn't care about her, but he had been asleep for a few days, and in that time, the Browns and the whole community had come together to actually get Aunt Lucy a plane ticket, and so instead of getting a pop-up book so that she could finally see London, they just flew her out to London so that she could see London with Paddington. All in all, I have to say, I need to stop doubting these movies, because after watching the first one, I was like, that was really cute. So I was a little bit like, ooh, is this gonna be as good as that first movie? I don't know, but this is the one that's so highly rated. And then the bear goes to prison. And like I said, I really had a moment where I was like, oh my god, the bear goes to jail? That's the plot of this movie? But honestly, it worked really well. And everything that I loved about the first movie, about the whimsy and the childlike wonder and the colorfulness and the antics and the goofiness of the movie, it's all there. But I talked about how in the first movie there is this deeper layer of this metaphor to immigration, and that exists in the second movie as well, like I've already talked about, with the metaphor to how immigrants are treated in, I would say, our criminal justice system, but this movie does take place in England. But to be fair, all of the criticisms that the movie seems to have for the criminal justice system and the way it treats immigrants apply to America's as well, maybe more so right now in the present moment. Anyway, this movie somehow manages to be more whimsical and more wonderful, childlike view of everything. Like I said, Paddington wins everybody over in the prison by making them marmalade. And not only that, but the actual set design of the prison, it's very symmetrical. It's very it's not super colorful right when Paddington gets there, but the more time he spends there, the more colorful it all gets. He wins the other prisoners over by making them marmalade. There is still this whimsical kind of goofy aspect to even the prison part of it, but there is this deeper piece to it. So it is somehow more whimsical and yet more deep and more serious in its messaging than the original movie, and it manages to conquer some of these really intense topics in a way that's not just approachable for children, but exists within a world that seems to be viewed through a child's eyes. It's just really impressive, honestly. And like I said, Hugh Grant gave the performance of a lifetime. His performance is incredibly impressive. Paddington is so cute in his little prison outfit. I love him. And it's just it is, I get why it has such a high rating. I have zero complaints about it. I wouldn't change anything about it. I also think it's a 99%. I also think it's perfect. So that's Paddington 2, but what about Paddington 3, or more aptly titled Paddington in Peru? Well, that movie just came out a few days ago, and I went to see it with my friends last night, and I will say it has a 94%, while the other movies are sitting at 96 and 99, so it is rated slightly lower than the other 2 movies. But remember, we're comparing it to the highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes, so I don't think it's saying that it's a bad movie to say it's not quite as good as Paddington 2. I did feel like it wasn't quite as good, unfortunately, but that is not at all saying it is a bad movie. I still think it's an incredible movie, and a 94% is a very, very high rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It is rare for a movie to be rated that high, so it's not that Paddington in Peru is a bad movie, it's just that it's not quite as good as the first or the second. So the premise of this one is that Paddington gets a letter from the Home for Retired Bears where a nun at the home informs him that his Aunt Lucy has been acting kind of weird and that she thinks that Aunt Lucy really misses him, and she recommends that he visits Peru to visit her. Mr. Brown got a new CEO, I think, or just a new boss who's American, and the gag is that they're an insurance company, but instead of avoiding risk, they have to be embracing risk, calculated risk. And so she's trying to push Mr. Brown to embrace calculated risk. So when they're talking about going to Peru, Mr. Brown is like, you know what, why don't let's all just go to Peru. Paddington freshly has a passport. He's become a British citizen. And at the beginning of the movie, the owner of the antique shop, who I'll admit to you, I don't know if they've ever established where he's from. I could not quite pinpoint his accent. But he ends up saying to Paddington, there can be a lot of mixed emotions about becoming a citizen of a country you're not from. So this further talks about the subject of immigration. And Paddington at first is like, I'm not confused about it. I love my home. I love being British. I love being in London now. But because he has a passport, he can now travel. And so he and the Browns travel to Peru to visit his Aunt Lucy. However, when they get to the Home for Retired Bears, they find out that Lucy has run off into the jungle. Why would she do this? She knew Paddington was on his way. Apparently, she decided to look for El Dorado, the lost city of gold that all the conquerors were convinced was out there. So this brings me to I have one criticism. For all three movies I watched, I have essentially one criticism, and it is for Paddington in Peru. And it is just that we've seen so many times this narrative of the mystical, magical Native American or South American that is aware of some kind of treasure or something that the white conquerors were looking for when they came to the Americas, but we're not able to find. This narrative is just very overdone and tired. And I know it can be very frustrating for, I would say Native Americans, but that doesn't quite capture the population I'm talking about. People who are native to the Americas as a whole. I feel like Native Americans is often used to refer to people who are native to North America, but I mean natives of the Americas as a whole. Being represented in this way is just kind of a little bit old and tired. And there were moments in the movie where I was I don't know how I feel about this. I don't think it quite branched into being offensive. I don't think we need to cancel Paddington in Peru, but I just think we've done this before. You know what I mean? And I think maybe it's time to move on from there being some kind of narrative of the treasure that the white conquerors were looking for that led to them abusing a bunch of people and being awful, being something relatively real and tangible that the characters end up looking for. I just think we've done it. They could have gone to Peru and had other things happen that weren't this, and the plot of the movie could have been different, and I just think it maybe should have been. But this is the premise of what we're dealing with, so we're gonna go with it. Basically, the family ends up striking out after Aunt Lucy, and they're trying to find her on her adventure to find El Dorado, supposedly, allegedly. That's what they're told by the nun. So they go out seeking El Dorado, but it's more seeking Aunt Lucy, they're trying to find Aunt Lucy, and they hire this riverboat captain to take them down the river, and it's him and his daughter. And so he's sort of partially a villain, but the main villain is the nun that's in charge of the Home for Retired Bears. Now, Mrs. Bird, who I don't know if I've actually mentioned up to this point in the video, which is kind of funny, but she's a nanny, maybe? She's an older woman that lives with them that presumably isn't a grandparent because they call her Mrs. Bird, but I don't know that it ever is established what her relationship to this family is, but she lives with them and she gets into all these antics with them. I assumed she was a nanny, but I don't know if that's ever formally established. Anyway, Mrs. Bird stays behind at the Home for Retired Bears, and there are a lot of points with the nun in the early movie between her and Mrs. Bird that are so funny. The nun is by far the funniest character in all three of these movies. As impressive as Hugh Grant's acting was, he was not as just raw funny as this nun was. Her comedic timing. Now, the plot of this movie can be explained a lot more simply than the others. Basically, both the riverboat captain and the nun are members of this family that were once conquerors that came to South America looking for El Dorado, and they're cursed with gold sickness. So basically they're haunted by their ancestors to hunt for gold and to find El Dorado. So they both are kind of misleading and manipulating Paddington into going on this journey because both of them kind of understand that Paddington is the key to finding the gold. Although the nun and the riverboat riverboat captain aren't working together. They're searching for the gold separately. Eventually, they do find the entrance, but the riverboat captain ends up saving his daughter. The nun basically threatens the riverboat captain and tells him he has to choose between his daughter and the gold, and he chooses his daughter, and so he does not go with them, and they manage to subdue the nun. Paddington basically like had this bracelet with him when they found him as a cub, and there's like a token on it, like a talisman, and they're able to put the token into this thing and it opens this like big rock wall, and they find the city of El Dorado, which is actually like an orange grove that's guarded by a community of bears, and it turns out that this is the community of bears where Paddington came from. Like this is Paddington's extended family. So they find Paddington's home, essentially. They find out where he's from, and it's this orange grove, and so he sets them up making marmalade, of course, because he has to. I don't say that to say I'm annoyed by it. It's cute. Like the obsession with marmalade is cute. And there's a moment with the family, I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, but what the family is dealing with now is that Judy is about to go off to college, and Jonathan is being really like reclusive, and the mom is really suffering from the fact that the family isn't spending time together anymore, and she's really upset about the fact that her daughter is going off to university. It's just a hard transition for any parent. I will say they recast the mom for this movie, and I do like the mom from the first two movies better than the mom in this movie. But at the end of the movie, when the family is kind of believing that Paddington is going to end up staying with these other bears, Judy seems to understand why her mom is so upset about her going to college and becomes a lot more compassionate towards her mother having a hard time with her going off to college, essentially. But then Paddington comes up and has this whole conversation with them where it seems like he's trying to ask them if it's okay for him to stay in Peru, but in reality, he's asking them if it's okay if he still comes home to London with them because that's where he feels like he belongs. Now, this is where I know I said I only had one criticism for all three movies, but I have one other criticism for this part. I actually think this would have been a lot more emotionally impactful if we had seen Paddington be torn about whether or not he wanted to stay in Peru. But instead, it was the family just kind of expecting that Paddington was going to want to stay in Peru. And then when he came up to talk to them, they were just assuming that's where the conversation was going. And so it's kind of sad because you're wondering if Paddington's going to stay in Peru or not. But he doesn't want to. He wants to go home to London with the family. I especially think because then at the end when he's writing another letter to Aunt Lucy, also I'll tell you what happened to Aunt Lucy. Just give me a second. But when he's writing the letter to her, like after they get back to London, he's telling her that he now understands what the antique shop owner was saying about having complicated feelings about becoming a citizen of another country. And so it's implied that Paddington had some mixed feelings about it, but we never actually see Paddington explore those. And so if we're looking at these as children's movies that are meant to be both enjoyable for children and to kind of discuss this topic of immigration and moving countries when you're very young, and possibly moving countries as a refugee and because you don't really have a home to go back to, sort of like Paddington was in the first movie, that Paddington now discovering that he has a community back in his home country, and although he has no family there, that is where he's from, and that's where a lot of bears like him live. I feel like there was a missed opportunity there for the movie to conquer some of those feelings within Paddington in a way that would help children in a similar situation where they maybe reach an age where they realize that there's still communities back in their home country that they could move back to, but that's not where they've lived for a while. And I think the movie kind of missed an opportunity to discuss some of that and approach it in a way that would maybe help children that are going through something similar. And so that was kind of disappointing. I think we maybe should have actually seen Paddington's emotions on this instead of just finding out from his letter to Aunt Lucy that he had them, even though he never really discusses what they were. So anyway, all of that to say that Aunt Lucy, it turns out like the nun basically like formulated this whole thing, and so Aunt Lucy never went on a trip to like see El Dorado. The nun put her on a boat and just like pushed her out into a river basically, and thought she killed her. But then the bears from the city of El Dorado, that they rescued Aunt Lucy and like took her in to El Dorado, and she's totally safe. So Aunt Lucy is fine, do not worry. But anyway, the movie ends with him back in London writing this letter to Aunt Lucy, and that's the conclusion. Now, like I said, I don't think this movie movie is as good as the other two, and I do think there was kind of that missed opportunity with talking a little bit more about what Paddington's feelings actually were about becoming a citizen of Britain now that he's been back to Peru and seen that he has a community there. If he wanted to go back and join them, like now that there is a place for him to go back to in Peru, like what does that change about his feelings? Why does it feel more complicated for him now than it did at the beginning of the movie where he was confused when the antique shop owner said that to him? I do still think there was a missed opportunity there, but I still think it's a really good movie. It's very whimsical, very fun. We had a good time. My friends that I saw it with hadn't seen either of the other two Paddingtons, and yet they enjoyed it a ton. They thought it was really funny as well, and they said kind of the same thing I did, which is like they went into it expecting it to be a children's movie, and they weren't expecting the humor to be as just like clever as it was. Like a lot of the jokes were like really well thought out and well executed and just like very goofy. And also I am starting my period, so I did cry through like half the movie just because I thought Paddington was really cute. Literally just like the little CGI bear kept just like making me cry because of his little face. He's just got a sweet little face. He's a cute little guy. So yeah, I gotta say I was skeptical. I wasn't sure if I was going to believe it, but I got to agree with the people on Rotten Tomatoes. These are incredible movies. I see why Paddington 2 is so highly rated. I thoroughly enjoyed them. I highly recommend them if you have not seen it. They're very enjoyable. And even now that you know the plots of them, honestly, like the plot is not what is endearing or fun about these movies. I highly recommend you watch them. I don't know if they were planning on making more or if Paddington in Peru was going to be the last one. We'll see. But what do you guys think? Have you seen these movies? Did you love them? What did you think of them? Let me know your thoughts down below. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!